You are listening to From Embers, a weekly show on CFRC 101.9 FM about anarchist and anti-authoritarian ideas and practice. We are broadcasting from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples on land that has come to be called Kingston, Ontario, Canada, because of the thievery and brutality of the Canadian state and its empire-loving parents. From Embers is about fires, some real and some metaphorical. Fires started generations ago and tended to over the years. Little sparks all across this territory that we hope will grow, spread, and engulf the thieving state called Canada and the capitalist system that has plagued this land since the fur trade. Hello, and welcome to From Embers. Personally, I've been spending way too much time on Twitter lately watching the drama of the right-wing-led anti-vaccine mandate trucker convoy unfold. So in some ways, I guess it's fitting that this week we will be talking about social media. Today I'm sharing my interview with an anarchist who really likes Mastodon, a decentralized social media platform that some say could be an alternative to the corporate-run spyware so many of us live our lives and mediate many of our relationships through. As someone who has tried for many years with varying degrees of success to abstain from those corporate platforms while still maintaining a social life, I was pretty curious about this latest non-corporate, non-spying alternative that does seem to be catching on a bit more than previous attempts I have seen to create alternative social media platforms that we can control. In this interview, we chat about the problems with mainstream social media, the advantages and challenges of using Mastodon, and how to get started using this platform, which might at first seem a little bit difficult to understand. Let's get into that interview now.
Yeah, so I'm just an anarchist. I'm in Canada, so-called Canada, and that's it. I'm interested in Mastodon and the Fediverse.
So I was wondering if you could explain what Mastodon is and what your relationship is to it.
Yeah, so there's a story about it. Mastodon is just one app that's part of what people call the Fediverse, which is definitely a cringy name, but people have failed to come up with a better name. So the Fediverse, what it is, it's like a federated network of many different open source social media applications, and they can all interconnect using a shared open protocol. So that sounds like a bunch of gibberish maybe. So I'll try to explain it. There's two main concepts about the Fediverse, right? There's decentralization and interoperability. And I think I can explain those maybe. And I'll try to think about it or explain it in terms of conventional social media, because that's probably what people are, I'm assuming, familiar with. So the first thing is that anybody can run a server in this world, and people usually call that an instance for any Fediverse app. So, and the servers will all talk to each other, and that's what creates the network. So this is decentralization, right? That's pretty easy to understand, I think. So in the example of Facebook, they have one server, right? That's Facebook owns this giant server somewhere. All of Facebook runs on that server. Facebook controls the server. They determine how it operates. They determine how they pay for everything, right? So for them, it's selling ads and collecting our data. They decide how it's moderated. In the Fediverse, you don't have an account on this one central Facebook server. Anybody can set up an instance, and it can even be in your home on an old computer. And you can host your personal account there, the account of some friends. If you're a user, you can choose which instance you want to host your account, base your account on, and you can move around from instance to instance. So, and then you can also follow and interact with other users no matter what instance they're on. So that's kind of the idea of decentralization, right? It's like a network of servers. The second thing is interoperability. And that's a little bit like probably less familiar. And that's the idea is that there's like anyone can create an app that can become part of the Fediverse as long as it uses the same shared open protocol. So that's like how the apps talk to each other to like share your posts and your account information between them. And it'd be like if you had your Instagram account and you follow a friend on Twitter, like from your Instagram account, and you like see their tweets inside Instagram. That's what that idea of like interoperability is. And so that's what the Fediverse is. It doesn't matter what app you're using, you can follow and interact with accounts anywhere else on the Fediverse. So Mastodon is just one of those apps, and it's kind of like the most popular one. It's like very mature. It's like widely used. I think there's like 4.5 million users on it. There's lots of like big and small instances, so servers, and it's just more user friendly. There's like apps and stuff that connect to it. So that's kind of the like explanation. Like there's lots of different apps, and Mastodon is just the one that I've been most interested in, just because it's like the most user friendly. It's the easiest to introduce to people who are like totally new to like the whole thing.
I guess like interoperability makes sense because it's like other protocols that maybe people are already familiar with, like SMS basically, or like anything that's like you could communicate with someone even if they're not using the same app as you. Is that like a reasonable way to understand it? Or like email, like a protocol rather than a program?
Yeah, SMS and email is a really good example. Yeah, so like the old way of the internet was way more interoperable, as they say. I guess my relationship with it is, maybe some listeners have heard of Collectiva.social, which is a Mastodon instance that a bunch of anarchist media collectives started in the summer of 2020, mainly because they got like kicked off of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So they started a Mastodon instance. I heard about it and tried it out, and that was kind of like my first like introduction to it. And yeah, I guess I'll probably talk more about like my journey or whatever later.
I guess it's like pretty impossible to talk about like new or alternative forms of social media without talking about the ones that already exist. I was wondering if you could tell me what you think is wrong with corporate social media platforms like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter.
I mean, that's like probably a huge conversation. I just saw today, I think Submedia and a few other groups are like releasing a movie soon in the summer, maybe about Facebook specifically and how it's really bad. I think it's called The Social something. Literally today, I think they like released a trailer. So I don't know. I think that's like a big can of worms.
For you personally, like what is the thing you hate about those platforms?
I mean, I just hate that they're like, the algorithm is bad. It like feeds you stuff. It's really bad for a lot of people in terms of the way it's like designed to be addictive. You know, it's like designed to suck you in, like the dopamine hit or whatever. It has really toxic social effects, like a lot of Twitter especially is what I like. It's really bad for people. It's bad for social interactions. You know, Instagram has a lot of like bad reputation for like, you know, like with young people and like their self-image. It's the whole model is based on like making money off of gathering our personal information and selling us ads. Like there's just so many reasons to not be into it. It's obviously like an entirely capitalist venture. Like it's fully rooted in capitalism. Like it's really, really inescapably tied to that in terms of how it's designed and modeled just to like get really into our lives and become really hard to escape from. And it has like tons of side effects and consequences in terms of like the bad, like addictive side of it. Yeah, I think it's just, I really have a hard time giving like a concise answer to that. I think it's like a really big question, but I think most people have like a pretty good understanding of why it's bad.
And what is different or better about the Fediverse or about Mastodon specifically?
Well, I think there's two ways to answer it. I could answer it from like a personal level about what I like about it, but I think there's also like really interesting structural differences. So on the Fediverse, there's no algorithm, right? There's no capitalist-based algorithm like designed to make you stay there and like feed you content. I actually like saw a toot. That's what posts are called on Mastodon because it's like an elephant going toot with its snout. So a post is called a toot instead of a tweet or whatever. And it was a toot about how corporate social media is more like an entertainment network. Like it's really designed at this point. The way it functions is like to serve you entertainment. That's how a lot of people interact with it in terms of like scrolling on their feed. And the Fediverse is not like an entertainment network. Like it doesn't have that built into it. It's really about like social connection and like communication and social interaction, which is kind of like what is maybe a cool thing about the idea of social media, especially if you can like remove it from being so rooted in capitalism, like fundamentally. So there's no algorithm, right? There's no ads. Like it's not designed to keep you there and sell you things. It's a lot easier to like interact with it in a healthy way because you really have to like intentionally decide on what you're going to see, like what accounts you want to follow and what's there. Because it's decentralized, because of how Federation works, like there's a lot of nicer social norms. Like it's just a lot less toxic. There's a lot less like, there's no virality. Like you can't really go viral on the Fediverse. It's a lot harder. It doesn't go as far. So there's less, that's not part of the appeal is like, I want to get lots of attention and go viral, which can like contribute to like pretty toxic social interactions, right? Like, you know, Twitter is a lot of like dunking on people and like quote tweeting to like, you know, pile on people and make fun of them and stuff. Like that's a real big part of like Twitter culture that doesn't exist on Fediverse for the most part, just because of like structurally, it doesn't really work. Like it doesn't reward that kind of behavior. The fact that it's decentralized is just appealing. Like as an anarchist, it just means that you have more freedom over what you can post. Like you can decide with your community what you want on your instance. What's like the goals of your instance? What are the norms? What do you do? And if you don't agree, it's really easy to like split off and do your own instance. And if you don't want to see what other people are posting, you can moderate and like defederate from those instances. Like it really has a lot of power in terms of like what you're going to see and interact with that you get to decide. You have way more like autonomy and way more power over like how you interact with it. Because it's just not based on like a capitalist goal. Like it isn't like there to make money from you. It's just there designed to be like a social network tool. I think there's probably a lot of other reasons, but they might come up like elsewhere in this conversation, I guess.
Do you personally still use Instagram or Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I'm still on Instagram, although if you follow me on there, you will probably have noticed that all my public posts are just about encouraging people to check out Mastodon. But I definitely use it like a lot of people. It's like Instagram is just like a way, keeping an account there is a way to keep in touch with like a certain like social category of people, kind of like your like middle distance friends and acquaintances. And it's really hard to totally turn away from that just because it's like so broadly used. So like, especially like, you know, like I had a friend pass away recently and it was just like, that was where it was easy to like reach people who were like also knew that person, right? It was just like, I think that's true for a lot of people. It's really hard to like break that. And Facebook and Instagram are both like really where people go to like organize and promote events. And it's really hard to escape that. I have like for a long time been working on lots of different projects to try and like encourage people to move off of like social networks to like promote and organize events, like specifically punk shows, like local DIY punk shows. And like part of my interest in Mastodon and Fediverse was like part of that continuation of that project. So like trying to figure out like, can this be a tool for people to organize those kinds of events?
That's so interesting. Like I personally don't have an Instagram or a personal Facebook account. And I find it like really hard to even find out about it. Like the most annoying thing about it is when people organize events that you can't know about unless you're on those platforms. Is that basically what you're trying to do with Mastodon? Like make it so that people have to have that app to know about those shows?
You mean that you have to be on Mastodon to know about a show? No.
Are you like attempting to use the same social pressure to get people onto Mastodon as like, I guess my friends are inadvertently using to try to get me onto Instagram?
Yes and no. I mean, definitely part of the project is like using from working on projects like that were around like promoting shows, like an email listserv and kind of like a flyer calendar and that kind of stuff, which was like a way for people to find out about shows easily without needing to be on Facebook and Instagram. I was like, okay, I have a social position there. Like people are like, oh, that's a person who like knows about shows and like will help me find out about shows through these various things if I'm not on Instagram and Facebook. So I knew that it would be a way to encourage people to check out Mastodon if they knew that it was one of those places to like get that information from me as like a reputable source of that or something. But that isn't like the goal of experimenting with Mastodon, is not to like be like, oh, you have to have this app. Because one of the things that is nice about the Fediverse in general and like Mastodon is like, it's not, again, this speaks to like the fact that it's not like based in like a capitalist business model. Like, you try to go look at a Facebook event, if you don't have a Facebook account and you like can't see the event, right? You can't view all the details. It immediately pops up with like sign up for Facebook to like view the whole page. Mm-hmm. And that's not how the Fediverse works. Like, you can easily go to like a profile page for an account on the Fediverse, generally speaking, and like you can see any public post that account has made, even if you don't have an account, like just in your web browser or on your phone. Like, it's a lot easier to interact with from outside of the kind of like walled garden of the network, which is like kind of how Facebook and Instagram try to like force you in. Because again, it's just not the priority of these apps, and the Fediverse isn't to like force people to use them to like see the information. So like I did create a Mastodon account for like local punk show information, but I made it so that anybody can see it right from the internet. You don't have to have a Mastodon account. It's a perk. You can like have an account and then you'll get like a notification. But even Mastodon will turn any account page into an RSS feed that anybody who uses an RSS feed reader can get updates that way, which is maybe like too technical. But the point is that it's very open, right? It doesn't like force you into the app to see that information.
So you were saying like one of the things that people use Instagram and Facebook for, of course, is like maintaining personal connections with people who they don't know as well. But the other one that you mentioned was like organizing events. Do you think this app is a possible alternative to that? Like, can you organize and promote projects over Mastodon? And if you do that, will you reach anyone who you don't kind of already know? Like, will it be different than just like sending out a mass email to your friends?
Yeah. So it's definitely possible for promoting events. I think Mastodon and like the Fediverse is a really good option or like alternative, or just a thing that projects should do. Like, I think anarchist projects should consider using it if they're on the internet, right? If they're the kind of project that wants to have like an internet presence to like update people on things that they're working on. I think it's like a really good thing to do, because again, like I was saying, anybody can view that information. It's not like if you have a Twitter account, it's kind of hard to look at a Twitter account and get updates from it if you don't have Twitter. And if you like your project has an Instagram page, like, well, anybody who doesn't have Instagram, like, good luck for them trying to read your info easily. But being on the Fediverse, it'll be easier for those people to find that information. Also, I mean, a lot of anarchist projects are getting booted off of these big corporate social media networks. And kind of when that happens, the rug gets pulled out from them. Suddenly, like, people don't know where to find them. If they establish that they're on the Fediverse, it's easier for people to at least find them there if they want to, or if they want to make an account to follow the different projects they're interested in, or at least bookmark them. Like, it is better. In terms of like organizing events, like, so the Fediverse has lots of different kinds of apps. There are Fediverse apps that are designed for specifically for like event organizing. So it kind of works like a Facebook event page, but again, it's like part of this like open federated network. I think that you will reach people that you don't already know for sure. Like, there are a lot of people who use Mastodon or the like Fediverse apps on the Fediverse who are like not using Facebook and Instagram. Definitely a thing that I've like found that was like kind of refreshing and cool in like creating a Mastodon account like in 2020 and like experimenting and dabbling with it, is like, oh, there's all these people on here who are like not people that I would ever meet online on other social networks, because they're the kinds of people who really don't use those. Like, there's a lot of anarchists who like live off grid, and the only account they have on social media is like a Mastodon account. And then it's like, you know, you can interact and get to know them there. And there's like people who live on boats and stuff like that. So you'll definitely reach people that you wouldn't reach otherwise. Like, but I mean, it is like, you know, I think it's called like the network effect. Like, the reason that everyone uses Instagram is because everyone uses Instagram. Like, that's where people are. So that's what you want to use to promote your event. That's a real problem. Like, for sure, you're not going to reach the same number of people if you like only use like a Mastodon account to promote events or promote your project. Like, I think it's totally valid for your project to be like, I want to have an account on Instagram or Facebook to promote, you know, my project, to reach lots of people, especially new people, especially like normie people who maybe aren't anarchists, but are like, might be curious about your project. So for sure that's true. But I think that projects should definitely consider like using Mastodon to have like a presence, to promote their updates. I've seen a lot more projects in the past year like creating accounts, and using it to promote things, update on like their projects or provide news. A lot of like anarchist media collectives are using it, partly just because they've been like kicked off or banned from corporate social media. And it's been really cool to see that, because it's like, that account's going to be there. It's way less likely to get taken down. You know where to go to find that info and like get connected to like stuff that's happening when stuff happens, when they're like event happens and there's a lot of info that needs to get really quick.
You are listening to From Embers on CFRC 101.9 FM, or you might be listening to the podcast edition of From Embers on your smartphone or another device. We are currently talking about Mastodon and the Fediverse, a non-corporate open source platform for social media that may help us move away from some of the most toxic and troubling aspects of corporate social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, while still staying in touch with our friends. Possible that like that with this app or another one like could actually like eventually draw people away from corporate platforms, like some of what we've seen happen with Signal recently. Like for like Signal, I think is like an example of like it was like my anarchy world app for in terms of like communicating on my phone, and then I had like a little part of my phone where like WhatsApp lives that I have to use to communicate with like my boss and some of my coworkers and like members of my family. And then in the last year, like I don't need that anymore because like people just have Signal. But I think like Signal really tried to make that happen too. Like that was like a specific goal of that project. And obviously that's not the goal of all projects. Do you think this is the kind of thing that like one day maybe like normies or like people who you just kind of like meet out in the world would be like, yeah, I totally have that app and you can just communicate that way and wouldn't need Instagram? Or will it always be like a second thing that you have?
I definitely think about Signal too in the same way, right? Where it's like sometimes the network effect seems like insurmountable. Like it's just like, there's no way people will ever stop using Facebook because everyone's on Facebook. But then like, remember MySpace? Like, people move from thing to thing. And like the backlash against corporate social media has like been a thing, like slowly increasing. Like, people are more and more fed up, even if they're maybe not like politically, like more and more like mainstream kind of normal people are like, oh, like Facebook and Instagram are kind of and like maybe bad for me and bad for the world, and like something else could be cool. And I've definitely seen like, I'm somebody who was like, okay, I'm going to check out this thing. And like, even since I've been there, like I've seen more people like me who like heard about it and then checked it out. Every time that like Instagram does something bad, like in the media, kind of like they're like caught being bad or whatever, and people are like, I'm finally going to quit Instagram. There's like a wave of people who come over to mostly Mastodon or like the Fediverse. And like some of them, maybe make an account, try it out for a day and then like leave, go back to Instagram or whatever. But a lot of them stay. And that's been happening more and more. Like collectiva.social that I think I mentioned, like that's a very big like anarchist Mastodon instance that has open registration. So it's like kind of really easy to be like a first landing pad. I think they have like 6,000 users now, which isn't like, that's not Instagram, but that's a lot of people in a subculture, like in a scene. And I think that's kind of how it happens, like a local scene or like a scene of people that are either like geographically, locally, like connected or culturally, subculturally connected. They can all start to move. And then you can start to see like more of those different subcultures will move over and they bring their people. And then like, you can see the network effect, like move people over. So like at first there's going to be like, yeah, for sure. You're going to use two things. And like, you're going to have your account on Mastodon where you're like on collectiva.social, which is kind of like anarchy Twitter, the way that Signal was like your anarchy phone. But I think the backlash against stuff, against corporate social media is a thing. Like I think more and more people are trying out Mastodon. Like now there's like, there's like the metaverse, right? There's Web3, there's NFTs. Like this is all the stuff that like, that's where corporate social media is trying really hard to go. And I think a lot of people are like pretty aware that that's not a good idea. Not just anarchists, like there's lots of people using Mastodon who are just like other kinds of people who at least are like corporate social media is bad. And it's not even just old people, like people maybe my age who are like millennials, right? A lot of like Zoomers and young kids are like growing up with like Roblox and are like also pretty disenfranchised with how that's the direction that social media is trying to go, like the metaverse, NFTs, like again, like all wrapped up in capitalism, like this real extreme thing that is pretty easy for them to like become disenfranchised with, even younger and earlier. So there's a lot of people like that who've already like, you know, they're like 20 and they're like burnt out on TikTok and are on Mastodon now or whatever.
What about like the more personal side of social media? People's personal accounts on those corporate platforms are like such a really important part of their day-to-day life in ways that are like, I find kind of disturbing, like really actually essential to like the way that people form and project their identities to each other even. Could or should all of that happen via a non-corporate platform such as Mastodon?
Or should it just not happen at all? Well, yeah, I mean, I think like the discussion of like, you know, is technology good, or like, you know, what does technology or like social media look like outside of like removed from capitalism? Like, is that good? Is it neutral? Like that's a huge discussion, right? I think that's like probably beyond the scope of what you want to talk about. So I'm just going to take as like a given that like for better or for worse, like social media as a thing is like a thing in the world today. It's not like going to go away. For a lot of people, it is important to them. It's part of their social life, right? For a lot of people, it's just like how maybe the majority of people, it's just like how a lot of their social life happens. And I think for a lot of people, again, it's like it is part of like forming their identity, um, and like how they like exist in the world, for better or for worse. That's like a thing. So if we take that as like a given, it is like better for people to be like doing that on a platform that isn't just there to like trap them and extract data from them to make money. It's probably better if it's like empowering and gives them way more control over how they do that, like intentionality and control and autonomy. And that's really like the idea behind the Fediverse and like how all these, like it's an open source protocol, right? There's like, you know, anyone can run an instance. You decide how you run your instance and what the like the rules or the guidelines are. Like there's definitely a lot of like queer and trans people on Mastodon who really talk about this. Like they left corporate social media, but for them, like being online, quote unquote, especially like younger people. And again, this is like for better or for worse, but it's a thing for them. It's like a big part of their existence or their identity is like being online lets them be like who they want to be more easily. And for them, it's like, oh, they like had whatever happened to them or got burnt out on like corporate social media, or just like had their political awakening and didn't want to reconcile like having to like be on Instagram to have that social media life. So they're on Mastodon. They talk about how that's like it's like important for them. I think also that like, you know, it's not like there is like a maybe a class or like a privileged position of being able to be like, oh, I can just stop using Facebook and use Mastodon instead or something. Like I recognize that for some people, like Facebook is or Instagram or whatever is like the way that they are in touch with like their community, like or a community that they're a part of. And that's just not going to change. Like people can't just like I don't want to be like shaming people for using corporate social media or something if that's like just how they are like connected to like a really important community for them. Like I know for a lot of people that's pretty real. So the point for me isn't to be like, oh, like shame on you for staying on Facebook or something. And it's really hard to like move an entire community to something that's like a little bit harder to use and like not quite as user friendly. And there's a lot more weird stuff to figure out because it's not designed to be as easy because it's not trying to, you know, again, keep you there to like harvest your data. So I think that's just an important like consideration when like thinking about people moving from like a social media world to another. But like, should it be a thing? I don't know. Like, I think like, what does social media look like if it's like not totally part of capitalism? Can it be a nice thing? Maybe, maybe not. I'm just trying to like experiment with it. It's definitely like, you know, during the pandemic right now, like social connection at a distance, especially like living in a city, is pretty important. And like, I think social media just exists as the way that's mediated now. So it's like, you know, you can like try and call a friend and like have phone calls or write letters. Like there's all these other ways to connect with people. But, you know, it's been like a lifeline for a lot of people. So trying to like provide an alternative that's at least a little bit better is like important to try, experiment with, I guess. That's kind of where I fall on that question.
Are people using Mastodon in those more personal ways currently? Like, are there accounts that are just someone's personal account and they're like primarily using it to like share details about their day or like reach out to the ether and ask for help with a problem, or even like catch up with friends, like kind of like person to person, the way that people definitely are doing with like Instagram?
Yeah, definitely. Like big time. I would say that culturally, like to describe the culture on Mastodon to some extent is like or like parts of it. There's like lots of different corners of the Fediverse, but parts of it is definitely like Tumblr, you know? It's like LiveJournal at the peak. Like a lot of people, it is like their little personal daily post about what they're up to. And because they're comfortable sharing that with strangers or at least with their followers who might be people they know online but not in real life, or it's people they do know in real life. The few friends that they do have who also use Mastodon or are on the Fediverse. But there's a lot of that kind of use, actually, like more than you see on Instagram, where it's people who are just kind of like, that's the kind of existence online that they do want. Like they don't necessarily want like anonymity. Like they want to like share their personal life or like details from their day to update their friends or to meet strangers who have shared interests. It really is like a lot of that vibe of like, I like the earlier internet, I guess, you know, for people like millennials, like my age or whatever, who like remember when, you know, you would have emails with people, and I guess like what LiveJournal was like for a lot of people, and message boards and stuff. So there is a lot of that. There's a lot of like, if you want to meet strangers or like new people or acquaintances who maybe you've like met in real life or heard about, but you want to like get to know them, like it's a really good place for that, for sure. Like that kind of like personal daily posting or whatever. Yeah, it really does have a lot of that.
How do you find people if they're not being fed to you via an algorithm that's like guessing your shared interests?
Yeah, I mean that is one of the big things that's hard about getting people to try it out, like convincing new people, especially like I said, like people who are used to social media being kind of like an entertainment thing where you like turn it on and it entertains you. Or like at least socially it does all the work for you, where it's like very creepily like, here are people you might know because it knows that you were like at the same event together last week. The Fediverse doesn't have that. It doesn't do that at all. Like, and that is, I think at first it's a real culture shock. Like if you create an account on Mastodon, I think when you create your account, it'll suggest like, here's a couple of accounts to follow. And it's just showing you like accounts that a lot of other people on that instance already follow. So kind of just like people who are active and post a lot. It's usually going to be like the administrator and maybe like a news account or something. But that's it. After that, you're on your own. You open your timeline and it's just nothing. There's nothing there. Like you have to, you know, you have to go outside of Mastodon and ask your friends, hey, who's on the Fediverse? What's your handle? Like, how do I find you? You have to like find them and add them. Like it's not going to creepily harvest your data, figure out who you know, and then like suggest people you might know. It's not going to do that. You really have to do a bit of work, which is hard because we're used to like not having to do that work at all, not be intentional about who we want to connect with. Again, for if you want to find like new people, like people that you don't already know, or accounts that you're not like already familiar with, like projects, you have to go looking around. Like you have to follow some people, you have to like search around, you have to like, you really have to dig to find stuff. And then once you're following people, obviously there's like reposting, you know, people like boost other posts that they want to share with their followers. And then, you know, you find people that have your interests and they're going to share things that you're interested in. Then you go follow the people you learn about that way. But yeah, you have to dig, definitely. Like it's hard at first, but then it's like really refreshing because it's like, oh, all the people that are here, all the posts that I'm seeing, I like decided to see. I like asked to follow this person. And if I don't like them, I can just mute them. and then I won't see their posts anymore, even if they're just annoying and, you know, they post too much or something. And it isn't constantly feeding you something. When you get to the end of your timeline, that's it. There's no new like suggestions for you. So it makes it a lot easier to be like, if you're someone who's like maybe addictive with your like use of social media, like it's not going to just feed you things. Like you have to, it's very easy to stop because you see all the updates from your friends and that's the end of your timeline. There's nothing else to see. So you go read a book or whatever, or you like see something that someone posted and then you go write them an email or you call them and say, hey, I saw your cool post. Like, tell me about that thing you worked on. It really like kind of encourages like not just being the only place where you do those things, I think, because it isn't good for like messaging. Like it isn't a messaging platform the way that Instagram and Facebook also try to be. It really like I don't talk to people privately on it. If I see something that a friend posts and I want to talk to them about it, I'll message them on Signal or I'll call them or I'll see them in real life and be like, hey, I saw that thing you posted. Because it's just not designed to be like a messaging, like DM private messaging app. You can't do that if you want to like, you know, reach out to someone. That's the only way you have to reach them. But part of the like structural difference is like it doesn't emphasize that as much.
Like, isn't virality like a really big motivator for getting people onto those platforms though? Like, to me, in some ways, it seems like a pretty big ask to ask people to like in real life go to their friends, ask them for their handle, comment on things that they saw that day, like directly. Like that would be like a really major cultural shift for a lot of people. Do you think it's working? Like, are people getting things out of this platform that they previously got from other social media platforms?
Well, I don't think they're getting the same thing because, like I said, there is like a difference in terms of how corporate social media is like more, a lot of it's more about entertaining you. Like besides the part where it's like, yeah, you can communicate with your friends, you have DMs and stuff like that. But it is like a different type of thing. But in terms of like, I want to get news, I want to like hear about what my friends are doing. I want to like meet people who are interesting, have similar interests to me, similar like interests or political alignments or ideas, but have different perspectives and different backgrounds. That's something that you get from it. The thing about like being like, oh, I'm going to see something and I'm going to like talk to them in real life or whatever, that's more like my approach. Like you can just comment on what people say. And like, if you want, you don't have to like approach it that way, but it's more like it encourages through its structure that kind of behavior, which is like generally leads to more positive social relationships than like, and also doesn't trap you like the way that Instagram traps a lot of people, and that's the only way they have to reach each other. So when Instagram's down, it's like, oh, I don't know how to reach like half of my friends because it's the only channel I have to reach them. And like Instagram moderates that channel and listens to it to sell me things. Like that just seems like face value bad as like a fundamental structure of something that we're going to use. So like it is working to some extent. Like I've said, like, you know, I've seen Collectiva since I've been using it since like around when they started. It's like grown a lot. And like we started our own little instance about 5 months ago. And like now we have 100 people who use it. And like most of them are like part of our like extended network of friends, mostly like in the city I live in, like people who actually know each other. And those people are some people who like never used Instagram or Facebook or stopped using Instagram or Facebook a while ago, but still want to have a type of social media experience that's not like those things. It has like things that they do want in terms of like being able to see what their friends are up to and like share updates about their day or projects they're working on or like music they're excited about or share news stories with each other. But they don't want all of the other stuff, I guess. It's definitely not like a revolution in like people using social media in terms of like thousands of people joining it. But it is like, I think it is like slowly working. Like all of these apps and stuff are way more mature and getting better. And more people are using them like every day.
Can you talk a bit about the politics of instances and like what it means to be on one versus the other and like how people decide like which corner of the Fediverse to be in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So like the thing about the instance is like, again, that's like where you make your account. So somebody runs the instance, right? That's like the person who's like in charge of like running the physical server. They have to pay for it somehow. So a lot of the times it's just like paying out of pocket or maybe collecting donations. In theory, you could run an instance where you have ads and that's what pays for it. I don't actually know of any examples of that, but where you decide to go, like you're kind of like choosing to host your account with that person or those people who administer that instance, right? So there's a certain amount of trust there in terms of like you trust them to like behave well with your data. And if you don't trust them, you can try and go somewhere else. Or again, you can always try and start your own. Also, the big thing is like moderation. So like what's allowed, like what kind of posts are allowed, how conflicts will be handled between users, how harassment will be handled, what kind of like posts are like allowed or like will be like moderated or deleted. Like you can, as an administrator, you can make a post like someone posts something, you can have it tagged as like sensitive content so other people won't see it unless they like click like, let me see what this sensitive post is. There's very powerful like moderation and stuff, which is another big thing that Mastodon has that most corporate social media doesn't really have at all. But so like you choose your instance based on like that kind of stuff, like the community values that are going to like establish what kind of stuff is like not allowed, I guess, or like not encouraged. And then also it's like the people on the instance you're on, you're able to see their public posts really easily. Every instance for the most part has like a local timeline that's kind of like not people you follow, but everything happening on your instance. So that's like a really nice way to have like a bit of a community around an instance. So a lot of like smaller instances are based around a shared group of interests or kind of a shared set of values. And for sure, in the Fediverse, there are like lots of like right-wing free speech, neo-Nazi instances, right? Where they're like, our code of conduct is anything is allowed except what will like totally get us shut down because it's like super, super illegal. But anything else is fair game. Like that's a thing that exists because people are like, those are the rules we want to have. And obviously like the instances that I've used have very different moderation policies about like what's allowed, right? And like how a conflict between users will be handled, and like if you're like, you know, how harassment is handled if you're like maybe like cyber stalking someone or like you know, bothering them even though they've blocked you or whatever. So like you get to choose where you want to be, what the kind of conditions or like contract is with your other users, and if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. And the way that Federation works is it's very easy to be like, okay, like we don't want to see posts from the neo-Nazis. So whenever we see one of those instances, we block it. Like we block the whole instance, and our instance will not talk to that instance anymore. And there's a really good community network of instances that are cool, basically, who all share bad instances when they come up. So like instances that either have no moderation that basically allow anyone to sign up and allow those people to post anything, which will lead to like trolls and you know, far right goons and Nazis and stuff, or they literally are like instances for those kinds of people, like catering to those people. So you just have a block list that's like, we're going to not federate with all those instances, and it allows you to really decide what kind of stuff you want to see. There's certainly a lot of like more nuanced kind of like politics in there that I could get into, but it's like, it's definitely worth noting that like the Fediverse is, you know, it's not completely politically neutral. Like, I mean, Gab, which was like a big, like right-wing, quote unquote, free speech social media network, it didn't start like this, but it ended up in the end, like using a fork, like a copy of Mastodon's code. So it was like a version of Mastodon. So it was technically part of the Fediverse, but most people who like make apps for Mastodon, the people who make Mastodon were like, yeah, we're not down with Gab, and like kind of made it difficult for Gab to be part of the Fediverse to the extent that's like, you know, people who write an app that's for like your phone to connect to Mastodon just wrote into the app, do not connect to a Gab server, because they were like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to make that call. But it can still happen. I think like a few months ago, Donald Trump like was like, I'm making a social media thing, and it never actually happened, but there was like a test page and it was just a version of Mastodon, but they had like broken the rules about how you're like allowed to use open source code. And I think there's a lawsuit and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just like to note that like, it isn't just like nice, cool anarchists or anarchist adjacent people using it. It's anybody. And some of them are bad. You know, some of them are like libertarian. Some of them are far right, quote unquote, free speech people who are there because, again, they've also been kicked off of Twitter and Facebook and stuff. So the moderation is just so powerful that you can really avoid those corners if you don't want to be there. In terms of like choosing an instance, if you're like a new user, there are ways to like look around and find one. It's definitely nice to find one that has like users that you know. There's like websites that will show you a bunch of like different instances that have open registration and kind of like what they're about in terms of like vibe and like subcultural interests or like rules or whatever. For people listening to this, I would recommend like collectiva.social. That's like the big anarchist one. It has open registration. There's lots of users there. It's a really good way to get a feel for how it works. And a lot of people will use that, and then they'll be like, okay, now I've found an instance where my true people are the people I want to like hang out with more online or something. And then they'll like move. And of course, part of the thing about the Fediverse is you can just move your account to another server easily. Like you don't lose anything by doing that. So
probably also partly because like I'm like in my 30s and got into the internet like via a different internet. I'm kind of like interested in what you're saying. Like it's like I really liked like message board culture when I was a kid. I liked things about MySpace that are like, I guess that is social media technically, but like a way less smart form of it. It does seem like I'm like, you know, a potential target for this thing. If you wanted to give someone advice that's like, okay, I'm going to spend like a couple days getting myself into this platform, how should they go about that? Like, what's a good way to like build a presence on there that's going to like feel kind of compelling and meaningful for someone if they want to find stuff out there?
Yeah, we're definitely, we're the same age. I think we're cut from the same internet cloth and are nostalgic for a different time for sure. So I guess I would answer this question like it could depend on like what kind of presence you want. Like obviously probably some people listening to this podcast like don't necessarily want a like non-anonymized presence on the internet. So you do have to like consider like, what's my level of like anonymity that I want to preserve. But let's just say like for the sake of the question, like you're creating an account for like your personal use. You want to like meet people, connect with friends, maybe meet new people, find out about projects, follow projects, find out about cool discussions. And, that's kind of like your level of what you're trying to do. So like, find an instance that is, close to your interests and has like moderation policies or whatever that are that you're down with, that you can live with, which shouldn't be too hard. I would recommend like Collectiva for people listening to this for sure. Create an account, and it's like important to like make a profile, right? Like fill out the info. Like if somebody sees you, right, and they're like, you're like commenting on something they posted or following them, and you just have like no profile, no picture, no posts, like that's just like a flag. Like that's just like, who is this person? Like, what's their deal? People don't like that. It's just like, you got to fill out your profile, again, depending on what your comfort level is with what you want to share, but what you're interested in, what you're there to do, like whether it's to meet people, to talk about certain interests you have, what kind of stuff you're going to post. If you want to post stuff, like let people know I'm going to post this kind of thing. Choose a photo, like an avatar. It doesn't have to be a photo of you, right? Like, again, it depends on your like comfort level, but like something that like establishes your vibe or whatever, like is something, right, that like communicates that you're like a real person using this and have a stake in it, I guess. And you have to like interact with people to get people to like interact with you or to like find stuff. So it's just a really good like policy, again, if you want to like kind of like really dip your toe in, like look around, look at like what people, if you find an account that you like or is interesting, look at what accounts they follow, check them out, follow a whole lot of stuff. Some instances will have a profile directory that'll just kind of show you people's profiles, and you can browse that and like just follow people who seem interesting, who seem to be like into what you're into, and then like like stuff, boost stuff that is interesting, reply to stuff if you have something to say about it, because it's like kind of like a new thing and everybody on there is kind of like in the same boat. People are really, really friendly for the most part, at least in the corners that like I'm in, and probably in the corners that like your listeners are going to end up in. People are really chill and friendly and super happy to like see a new person. So if you like are interacting with them or trying to chat with them, they're going to probably be like, cool, and check out your profile. And if they see interests that appeal to them or something that is interesting to them, they're going to follow you back. And if you do that a little bit, like you follow a lot of accounts kind of in a little bit indiscriminately based on like this account seems cool. This project seems cool. This account seems to like boost a lot of stuff that I think is interesting. You'll get a timeline with like a lot of stuff in it. And then you can kind of like decide what you actually like and don't like and maybe cull it down a bit. Maybe you'll actually meet some people, establish like relationships. You might run into people that you already know, like that's happened to me where I've like found people that I like actually know in real life from across the continent who are just on there and are using it all the time. And now I have like a new connection with them. So that's kind of like what I did. It did take work to kind of like look around and follow people kind of indiscriminately, like a lot of like strangers who just seem to have a cool account and post a lot. But then you kind of like find the stuff that's interesting to you and people who are boosting or like have really cool projects that they talk about, or interesting lives or experiences that they talk about. Or you'll find projects like pages that are just for straight up a project or like a collective or something that is interesting that you want to follow and get updates from. I mean, that's kind of my advice. You just have to you got to put in like, a bit of work. A quick tip too is like a lot of people will use stuff like this on their phone, like either in their browser or with an app. But if you open it in a browser on like a computer, like a desktop or a laptop, you are able to like see a lot more features, especially if you're trying to look at accounts that are on different instances, which is like a little bit like technical or whatever. The short version is just like it works. There's a lot more stuff if you're like on your desktop, especially if you want to like explore and find a lot of accounts to like check out and stuff. Spending a little bit of time on your desktop, if you have one, can like make that easier.
Cool. Yeah, that's really helpful. I just have like a meta question, which is like, what do you get from it? Like, has it enriched your life, or does it just like impoverish your life less than Instagram does? Like, what are the like tangible benefits for you of being on there?
I mean, I have found it enriching for sure. Like partly like the technical challenge of like setting up an instance myself, like that was rewarding, but it has been cool. Like I maybe mentioned this a little bit, but like I have met people on there that I would not have met otherwise, right? Like people that I'm not going to have met on Instagram and probably not have met through, mutual friends in real life, at least not as easily, unless I like traveled in the right way or something. And there are people who have like very different life experiences and backgrounds from me, or in different places in life, but to me are really cool, like have really cool experiences or perspectives or work on really cool projects. And these are people that you're not going to find on Instagram or Facebook. And it's harder to connect with people like that and find them in real life. It's kind of like, again, nostalgic for like the magic of the early internet, where you could be like browsing around a weird website and find somebody who's just like a nerd about the thing that you're a nerd about. And you can like suddenly have this friend who has like a shared interest. Again, sidestepping the discussion about like if mediating social interactions through technology is like a net good or bad or neutral in general, that experience I find enriching in this like current context. And I've had a lot of that on Mastodon. And I think it is like valuable. And it is that in addition to like totally allowing me to like not have to use Instagram as much for like the desire to like see what's happening or like follow news and stuff. I guess like I do get enough like kind of like the type of news you get from Twitter in terms of like following anarchist media projects and like general media and people talking about news stories that I like to get from social media in terms of like what are people saying about like a news story? What are people that I think are smart saying about a story I'm interested in? I've gotten a lot of that from it as well, which is like enriching, and it's nice to get that from somewhere other than having to like look at Twitter or Instagram or whatever.
I was hoping that to close the conversation, you could direct people to like what their first step is if they're interested in this and they want to kind of get involved. What app should someone download? What should they do if they want to check it out in a way that's not like totally overwhelming?
Like I've been saying, like there's a lot of different apps on the Fediverse. It's worth your time to like check them out down the line. Mastodon has its problems for sure, but it's definitely the easiest one to use. It's going to be the most familiar to you if you like use other social media. Like functionally, it looks like Twitter basically. So like find a Mastodon instance. If you're an anarchist, collectiva.social is a really good one that has open registration so anyone can sign up. Like I said, you can use it in your browser, but there are apps. So there's a really good app for Android called Tusky, And iOS is a little bit trickier. There's an app called Metatext. There is like an official quote unquote app called like Mastodon for iOS, but it's missing a lot of features in the app. So I don't recommend people use that one. Yeah, that's basically the starter package. I would say like check those things out, give it a shot, and like give it an honest effort. Like if you just create an account and don't post or follow anything, like nothing's going to happen. You know, it's not going to do it for you. There's no algorithm to do the work for you. So
that is all the time we have tonight on From Embers. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you want to get in touch with us to give us feedback or suggest future content, you can email us at fromembers@riseup.net. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, tune in at this same time to CFRC 101.9 FM next week, or check out our podcast feed by simply searching From Embers in whatever application you already use to listen to podcasts. Have a good night.
In theory. In theory, communism works. In theory. In theory.
So I says to Mabel, I says, "Oh, hello. I'm Tom."
I'm Alicia.
And I'm Nate. And we're the hosts of Works in Theory podcast on the Channel Zero network. Have you ever been in an argument on Twitter and just wished you could drop a devastating David Graeber quote, but hadn't actually read any of his works? Or are you interested in the foundational works of anarchism and communism, but weren't willing to slog through 300 pages of 19th century text?
Works in Theory podcast has done the hard work for you. We read works like Peter Kropotkin's Mutual Aid or David Graeber's Fragments of an Anarchist Anthropology and make them accessible through casual conversations.
Our whole first season is up now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Search for Works in Theory podcast. You can subscribe. You can even go ahead and listen to Works in Theory podcast because
communism works in theory.